Through the 2024 presidential election, campaigns are well underway. The left is working to have the contest decided not at the ballot box, but by Democrat judges. With President Biden slumping in the polls and no nationally recognized Democrat willing to step into the arena, the left's election strategy appears to have shifted from winning at the ballot box to jailing or disqualifying their strongest opponent, all while claiming that, quote, democracy is on the ballot. How should we respond to this assault on the republic? What do we need to be aware of? How do we know this is happening? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Mike Davis, founder of the Article 3 Project. He previously served in all three branches of government, including as chief counsel for nominations to Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley in the Department of Justice during the George W. Bush administration, and on the staff of the Supreme Court with Justice Neil Gorsuch. Mike, welcome to Washington Watch. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me, Tony.
All right, so I want to start with, let's just start where we are today. President Trump, for over a month, has been in a New York courtroom on a civil criminal charge, or civil charge of fraud. Now, there's no aggrieved party. It's just the Attorney General of New York that is pushing this case. But we're seeing these pop up all over, and then we're seeing him being challenged to being on the budget as an insurrectionist. So is this a coordinated effort to try to do what they couldn't do politically, destroy Donald Trump?
This is absolutely Democrat lawfare and election interference. It is unprecedented. It is very dangerous to democracy that the Democrats pretend like they are protecting. They impeached President Trump twice for nonsense. They indicted him 4 times for non-crimes. They're trying to bankrupt him in this civil lawsuit in New York for the non-fraud of a businessman paying back sophisticated Wall Street banks on time, in full, as agreed, with interest. They're trying to disqualify him from the ballot. They're simply trying to take him off the ballot in several states because this lawfare and election interference is backfiring, and President Trump is on a path to beat President Biden like a drum on November 5th, 2024. So they just want to take him off the ballot.
So Mike, in a previous life, back when I was in law enforcement, I actually worked in anti-terrorism with the State Department for a while. One of the things we would do in terrorist analysis is that we would connect the dots. We would look at, because you've got all these little appearing to be separate incidents that are occurring out there. Can you connect the dots for us? Where are the connection points with all these things we see happening across the country?
Well, a connection point is Joe Biden. Another connection point is George Soros. And Joe Biden is the one who waived President Trump's claim of executive privilege that was relayed by Deputy White House Counsel Jonathan Su, and that paved the way to the unprecedented, unnecessary, and unlawful home raid on President Trump for the Office of Former President for Presidential Records that the former president is allowed to have under the Presidential Records Act. That was like 16 months ago. The Article 3 Project, we've done like 2,000 media hits since then warning people that this is coming, that this is election interference, this is lawfare. They indicted President Trump in New York for settling a nuisance claim, and somehow that became a campaign finance violation. They have Jack Smith, Biden's deranged special counsel, along with Democrat DA down in Fulton County, Georgia, Fani Willis, indicting President Trump for January 6th for the non-crime of objecting to a presidential election, which is allowed by the Electoral Count Act of 1887. Twisting arms politically is allowed by the First Amendment. If it's a crime to object to presidential elections, Democrats would be in prison for objecting to Republican wins in 1968, 2000, 2004, and 2016. I don't see Al Gore and John Kerry and Hillary Clinton in prison for objecting, but that's exactly what they're trying to do to President Trump. And this is lawfare. This is election interference. And Congress needs to step up. They need to cut off funding for these federal and local prosecutors who are engaging in these republic-ending tactics.
Okay, so I want to go there. We've got a few minutes to talk about this, but before we go there, because we were just talking with one of the Budget Committee members, we were actually talking about with Andrew Clyde about how the appropriations bills we need to address these types of things in there. So we're going to go there in just a moment. But I want to go back to something that you've been tracking that's happening right now in Colorado. And I want you to explain to our viewers and our listeners what's happening there in a state court.
So this Denver District Judge, Sarah Wallace, is a new appointee to the bench, to the trial court out here in Colorado. She was appointed by Democrat Governor Jared Polis. She started in January of this year. Governor Polis named her in October of 2022 to start in January of 2023. In August of 2022 to start in January 2023. In October of 2022, this Denver district judge designee, before she became a judge, donated to an anti-Trump January 6th PAC to chase out of office Republicans who supported Trump on January 6th. Now she's presiding over a trial, an anti-Trump January 6th trial to throw President Trump off the ballot. These Democrat operatives and fake Republicans are trying to throw President Trump off the ballot in Colorado to establish a precedent in this blue state with this Democrat judge and these Democrat operatives so they can use this in swing states like Michigan and other states to chase President Trump off the ballot so they can just disqualify him.
So, okay, Mike, so how are they trying, what are they using to throw him off the ballot? What are they saying? What's the rationale for them removing him from the ballot?
They're trying to say that after the Civil War, Congress passed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to outlaw slavery, provide equal protection and due process to freed slaves and voting rights to the freed male slaves. And as part of the 14th Amendment, these Confederate sympathizers who engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the Union were winning offices and undermining the post-Civil War Reconstruction effort and the Union. So Congress passed and the states ratified Section 3 to the 14th Amendment, which disqualifies those who engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States from holding office, right? And there is a case from 1869 that says in order to disqualify, a U.S. attorney or the federal government has to bring federal charges to a federal grand jury and a federal judge and a federal court. The jury has to find guilt beyond a reasonable doubt unanimously. The court has to convict, and then this conviction has to be upheld on appeal. That's the only way you can disqualify.
Has that happened?
No, it's not. Congress passed this statute in 1870. They updated it again in 1948. Jack Smith and January 6th, the January 6th committee, Jack Smith, the Biden Justice Department have spent tens of millions of dollars in years hunting for evidence of insurrection. It doesn't exist, right? Otherwise, Jack Smith would have charged Trump with insurrection. How many insurrectionists get to the Senate floor of a nation's capital, take selfies, walk through velvet ropes, and follow police direction, and don't burn down the place? January 6th was a lawful protest permitted by the National Park Service that got out of control and devolved into a riot.
So you have a state, let me make sure I get this correct. Correct me if I'm wrong. You have a state judge in Colorado that is presiding over a trial in which someone has accused President Trump, former President Trump, of being an insurrectionist. Therefore, he should be taken off of the ballot in Colorado, this being an example or an encouragement to other states to do the same. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And this Denver district judge is going to hear closing arguments on November 15th, Wednesday, November 15th, and she said by Friday, by close of business on Friday, November 17th, she is going to rule. I guarantee you she is going to disqualify President Trump from the ballot here in Colorado.
This is crazy. He's not been, as you said, the president has to be at least charged, but he's not even been charged, so he hasn't been tried, he hasn't been convicted, he hasn't even been charged with insurrection. So how in the world can they do this in Colorado?
Well, they put January 6th defendants in the D.C. gulag for months and months and months without charges. These aren't Democrats. Today's Democrats don't seem to care too much about due process and equal protection of law and following the law. They care about lawfare. They care about power. They care about winning elections, and they care about destroying anyone who gets in their way. And they're trying to destroy President Trump now. And what people need to understand is this doesn't stop with President Trump. They are going after Christians praying outside of abortion clinics. They are going after parents outraged by gender chaos and the resulting rapes in high school bathrooms. This is not our parents' or grandparents' Democrat Party. These aren't liberals who love America. These are leftists who hate America. These are Marxists.
So this is why you say this is about the future of the republic. This is dismantling our rule of law in this country if this is allowed to go forward. Therefore, what you have proposed is that the Republicans who control the House and have the ability to control the purse strings make this a top priority, or all this other stuff is just academic discussion.
This Democratic lawfare, this election interference by the Democrats, these are republic-ending tactics. Think about how the Roman Republic fell, right? It was because Caesar crossed the Rubicon from Gaul into Rome because the Roman insiders were engaging in lawfare against him, and it led to the fall of the Roman Republic. Does anyone really think that President Trump is going to turn the other cheek when he's back in the White House? This is going to lead to a legal tit for tat that's going to destroy our country. And this is why House Republicans need to end this. And I want to commend Congressman Andrew Clyde from Georgia, for taking up two appropriations riders that the Article 3 project has been championing to cut off federal funding to Jack Smith and these federal prosecutors and these state prosecutors who are pursuing major presidential candidates on or before November 5th, 2024. They waited 30 months to bring these charges against Trump. They timed them, stacked these charges back to back, stacked the trials back to back to interfere with the election. They can wait until after the election. Okay. And that's what Andrew Clyde's writer does.
All right, I want to one question before we get to the actual these funding tools. Who's choreographing this? Who's calling the shots here? Who's the puppet master?
I'd say it's coming from the Biden White House, because Jonathan Sue clearly greenlighted the illegal home raid on President Trump back in August of 2022 that started all this. But it's these Soros prosecutors who are coordinating with the Biden administration, with Merrick Garland, with Jack Smith. This is very dangerous what these Democrats are doing. We're not going to have a country left if they're successful. If they think that they're just going to take President Trump off the ballot, who's the leading presidential candidate, and the American people are just going to be fine with that and say, okay, let's move on because Trump is gone, that's not going to work. And
anybody who ever sticks their head up and challenges the left will face the same treatment. So, I mean, this is about restoring justice in this country. Okay, we're almost out of time, Mike Davis. So I want to, two appropriations areas that you focus on. You made reference to them, but I want to be very clear with our listeners. So as we are working through these appropriations bills, that's a big part of the discussion taking place right now in the country, is in the House Appropriations, two specific appropriation riders that you've talked about. Summarize those for us so we can give our folks their homework.
So if the federal government wants to continue to have funding, if these Democrat hellholes want to continue to have their funding like New York, D.C., and Atlanta, they need to stop their lawfare. They need to stop their election interference. This is unprecedented. So they can pause their cases until after the presidential election, because the American people, not these Democrat prosecutors in D.C., New York, and Atlanta, get to decide the next presidential election. And that's
so
all
Congress has the ability to, number one, for the federal government, cut off the spigot, say, hey, no election interference. You cannot go after a presidential candidate until after the election. So you can't make these things up, right?
I mean, that's been the policy of the Justice Department for 250 years until now.
But it's not now.
Yeah. And so this would just restore the norm that you don't go after major presidential candidates during a presidential election, especially on bogus charges. And that's what Jack Smith has brought against President Trump.
All right, very quickly, controlling the money at the state level. How do they do that to keep these local jurisdictions?
Well, does New York, does New York, does Atlanta, does Georgia, do they want to keep getting federal funding? If they do, they're going to pause these prosecutions until after the election.
All right. Mike Davis, great information. Thanks so much for joining us today and laying all this out.
Thank you so much.